I spent thousands of dollars on a lavish vacation, hoping to finally earn my family's respect. Just minutes before departure, I discovered my name was crossed off the very trip I bought, replaced by my sister's new boyfriend. They expected me to smile and swallow the insult. They had no idea I was about to cancel every single reservation, or that I knew they planned to erase me long before the suitcases were packed. My name is Kendall Graham. I am 34 years old, and I reside in a meticulously curated, painfully quiet apartment in the heart of Chicago. For the past decade, I have built a highly lucrative career as a senior crisis management specialist at Alder Row Advisory. It is a prestigious, high-stakes firm, the kind of place that wealthy people call when their reputations are hemorrhaging. If a tech billionaire says something catastrophically offensive on a hot microphone, or if a global cosmetics brand accidentally releases a toxic batch of serum, I am the woman they summon at 3 a.m. I step into burning rooms, extinguish the flames with absolute precision, and construct a narrative that allows the people who actually started the fire to walk away looking untouched. I am excellent at my job. I am known for my ice-cold demeanor, my strategic foresight, and my complete lack of panic when the world is collapsing. But my professional success is not a coincidence. It is merely the monetized version of a role I have been forced to rehearse for my entire life. To the outside world, I am the portrait of modern stability. My financial portfolio is robust, my daily routine is strictly disciplined, and my life is entirely under my own control. Yet, the moment I cross the threshold of my family's orbit, all of those achievements are weaponized against me. In the Graham household, my independence is not celebrated. It is simply viewed as a convenient excuse to ignore me. Because I am stable, the unspoken rule dictates that I do not require care, attention, or grace. The undisputed emotional center of our family is my younger sister, Marin. Marin is 30 years old and proudly labels herself a lifestyle content creator. She takes on scattered, freelance event planning projects that fluctuate violently between brief moments of manic success and long stretches of absolute financial ruin. She exists in a perpetual state of dramatic flux. When Marin is happy, the entire family must bask in her radiant light. When Marin is overwhelmed, which happens with exhausting frequency, the entire family must drop everything to cushion her fall. Our parents, Douglas and Elise Graham, are completely blind to the toxicity of this dynamic. If you were to ask them, they would swear on their lives that they love us both equally, without a single ounce of favoritism. They do not view their actions as biased. They view them as perfectly equitable resource management. They have convinced themselves that because I am forged from iron, a little neglect will never leave a dent. Marin, however, is perceived as being made of spun glass. You have to understand, Kendall, my mother would say, her voice dripping with that practiced, gentle condescension whenever I pointed out a discrepancy. You are just so naturally resilient. You have always been our rock. Marin is a sensitive soul. She feels the weight of the world so deeply. She just needs us to yield a little more right now. That phrase, yield a little more, has been the soundtrack of my existence. I have spent my entire adult life yielding. More accurately, I have spent my life functioning as a high-end sanitation worker for my family's emotional and financial spills. I am the one who books the emergency flights when Marin has a breakdown in another state. I am the one who silently transfers funds to cover the deposit on her newest, overpriced apartment after she inevitably blows her budget on aesthetic home decor. I am the one who provides the calm, rational advice when my parents are spiraling over their retirement funds, only to be politely shoved back into the shadows the moment the crisis is averted. I am the safety net. But the tragic irony of a safety net is that people only ever look at it when they are falling. The rest of the time, it is just something meant to be stepped on. I had become nothing more than a breathing wallet to them, a reliable contingency plan devoid of any personal needs. The resentment did not come all at once. It did not explode like a bomb. It accumulated like frost on a window pane, layer by microscopic layer, freezing me from the inside out. I swallowed my humiliation, pasted on a tight smile, and continued playing the role of the mature, unbothered older sister, because I believed that if I was useful enough, they would eventually have to love me for me, and not just for what I could fix. That brings me to the trip, the luxurious, impossibly expensive vacation I planned to Napa Valley. In my mind, this trip was never just a vacation. It was a calculated, desperate architectural project. I was trying to build a memory so grand, so flawlessly executed, that my family would have no choice but to cement my name right in the center of it. It was my final, exhausting effort to buy my way out of the margins of my own family. I thought that if I financed the ultimate dream, if I curated a breathtaking experience entirely out of my own pocket, they would finally look across a candlelit dinner table and see me as an irreplaceable part of our family, rather than a convenient utility. I wanted to be the architect of their joy, hoping that in return, they would offer me a permanent seat at the table. I was not afraid of the staggering price tag. I am a wealthy woman, and the money was just paper to me. What terrified me, what kept me staring at the ceiling in the dead of night, was the creeping dread that I could pour every ounce of my sincerity, my resources, and my desperate yearning into their hands, and still be viewed as entirely expendable. The tragedy was never about the thousands of dollars I swiped on my platinum card. The core, bleeding tragedy was that I was attempting to purchase a sense of belonging from people who had already spent 34 years proving that my primary value to them was my ability to disappear when the check was paid. I just did not know yet how brutally they were about to prove it one final time. The fracture in my family did not happen overnight. It was not a sudden earthquake that shattered our foundation. It was a slow, deliberate erosion. A lifetime of being pushed to the very edges of my own life by things they dismissed as just small adjustments. I remember the exact texture of the carpet in our living room when I was 11 years old. That was the year my parents promised to take me to a dark sky preserve in Wisconsin. I had been obsessed with astronomy, checking out heavy library books and saving my meager allowance for a beginner telescope. My father had circled a weekend in August on the kitchen calendar in red ink. I had packed my duffel bag 2 days early. On the Friday afternoon we were supposed to leave. Marin came home from her summer theater camp in hysterics. She had auditioned for the lead role of Dorothy in their production of The Wizard of Oz. But the director had cast her as a tree. She threw herself onto the floor, sobbing so hard she began to hyperventilate, claiming her artistic spirit had been crushed. I stood by the front door, my hand resting on the strap of my bag, watching my mother rush to the floor to cradle Marin's head. My father walked over to the calendar and quietly erased the red circle. He turned to me, offering a sad, helpless smile. "We cannot leave her when she is this devastated, sweetheart," he said gently. "You know how sensitive your sister is. We will go look at the stars another time. You are our mature girl, Kendall. You understand, right?" I did not say a word. I just carried my bag back up the stairs. That was the first time I realized that my joy would always be collateral damage to my sister's sorrow. When I was 18, the stakes grew larger, but the pattern remained exactly the same. I had worked myself to the bone, studying late into the night while my peers went to parties, all to secure a prestigious, full-tuition merit scholarship to a top-tier university. The day the acceptance letter arrived, my parents promised me a celebratory dinner at a high-end steakhouse downtown. I wore my best dress. I felt, for a fleeting hour, like the sun was finally shining directly on me. We sat down at a white-clothed table, and my father ordered a bottle of champagne. But before the waiter even brought out the appetizer plates, Marin, who was 19 and floundering in her second semester at a local community college, let out a loud, dramatic sigh. She announced that she could no longer endure the suffocating environment of traditional education. She declared she was dropping out to open a bespoke creative studio, though she had no business plan, no clients, and no capital. The gravity of the table shifted instantly. The champagne that was meant to toast my academic triumph was instead poured to soothe Marin's anxieties about her future. For the next 20 minutes, my mother enthusiastically brainstormed loft spaces Marin could rent, while my father mentally calculated how much he could pull from his savings to fund her startup costs. My acceptance letter remained folded inside my jacket pocket. My achievement was completely swallowed up, digested, and forgotten before the main courses even arrived. I ate my meal in total silence, listening to them build a castle for Marin while I sat in the dirt. As we moved into full adulthood, the double standards morphed into a financial and emotional chasm. When I was 22, I bought my first car. It was a used, unglamorous sedan with 92,000 miles on the odometer. I paid for it entirely by myself, working double shifts at a consulting firm while finishing my degree. I paid the remainder of my tuition. I signed the lease on a tiny, drafty apartment and bought my own groceries. I asked for nothing, and therefore, I received nothing. Marin, on the other hand, lived in a state of perpetual, subsidized chaos. When she could not make the rent on her trendy, overpriced downtown loft, my mother secretly transferred the funds. When Marin decided she needed a professional camera and lighting equipment to launch her lifestyle brand, my father swiped his credit card without hesitation. When she inevitably maxed out 3 different credit cards, buying designer clothes to maintain her aesthetic image, my parents sat her down, hugged her, and completely cleared her debt. If I ever showed up to Sunday dinner looking pale and exhausted, if I ever dared to admit that I was drowning under the pressure of my career and my responsibilities, I was met with a stern lecture. My father would cross his arms and instruct me on the importance of strict financial planning and time management. He would tell me that adulthood is about carrying your own weight. Yet, every single time Marin failed, every time a business venture collapsed or a project burned to the ground, my parents rushed in with bandages and open checkbooks. They called her failures a brave journey of finding herself. They called my exhaustion a lack of discipline. The family gatherings became a perfectly choreographed play where I was merely an extra in the background. Thanksgiving, Christmas, casual Sunday barbecues. Everything revolved entirely around Marin. We had to discuss Marin's latest mood swings. We had to analyze Marin's newest freelance project. We had to dissect the drama of Marin's romantic life, or whatever minor inconvenience had recently shocked her delicate system. I would sit on the sofa, nursing a glass of wine, answering emails on my phone. Occasionally, an aunt or a family friend would ask how I was doing, and my mother would jump in before I could even open my mouth. "Oh, Kendall is always fine," my mother would say, waving her hand dismissively, though she phrased it as a compliment. "Kendall never needs any help. She's completely self-sufficient." It was a brilliant, devastating trick. The blatant favoritism was never called by its true name. It was always dressed up in a wardrobe of very polite, deeply manipulative phrases. "Do not hold it against your sister," they would whisper when Marin threw a tantrum and ruined a holiday dinner. "You know she is incredibly fragile," they would say when she flaked on her responsibilities and left me to clean up the mess. "You are the solid rock of this family, Kendall," they would tell me, patting my shoulder as they handed me the bill. I grew up hearing these sentences on a loop, internalizing the poison until it felt like medicine. I slowly came to understand a bitter, undeniable truth. In the Graham household, my existence was conditional. I was only loved, only acknowledged, and only tolerated when I was convenient, completely silent, and highly useful. I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a utility knife, kept in the drawer until something needed to be cut, fixed, or paid for, and then immediately put away. I endured this dynamic for over 3 decades. I swallowed the resentment every time I booked a flight to rescue Marin, every time I paid a deposit to secure a venue for my parents' anniversary parties, every time I stood on the sidelines and watched them pour unconditional love into a bottomless pit while I dehydrated in the desert. I reasoned that if I just did one more thing, if I just fixed one more disaster, The scales would magically balance. That is exactly why the Napa Valley trip was never just a vacation. When I handed over my credit card to book that luxury estate, I was not buying a few days of relaxation. I was gathering 34 years of quiet indignities, 34 years of canceled astronomy trips, ignored scholarships, and lectures on resilience, and I was packing them all into a highly pressurized container. I thought I was building a bridge to finally reach my family. I did not realize I was actually wiring a bomb, and that they were the ones who would light the fuse. The catalyst for the most expensive decision of my life was so remarkably mundane, I almost scrolled right past it. It was a brisk Sunday morning in early October. I was sitting alone on my dark velvet sofa, drinking bitter black coffee, mindlessly thumbing through my social media feed while the city of Chicago woke up outside my window. That was when the algorithm delivered the strike. It was a photograph posted to my sister's account. The image featured a rustic, reclaimed wood table bathed in the warm, golden hour sunlight of a trendy bistro. The table was cluttered with empty mimosa glasses, half-eaten plates of brioche French toast, and expensive ceramic coffee mugs. Around that table sat my mother, my father, and Marin. Their heads were tilted together in the center of the frame, their faces caught in the middle of genuine, uninhibited laughter over some shared private joke. The caption beneath the photo read, "Perfect Sunday brunch with my two absolute favorite people on earth." I checked the location tag. They were dining at a popular brunch spot exactly 3 blocks away from my apartment building. I looked at the timestamp. It had been posted 45 minutes ago. Nobody had called my phone. Nobody had sent a casual text asking if I wanted to walk over and join them. I sat perfectly still, staring at the glowing screen until my phone eventually timed out and faded to black. I did not shed a single tear. I am not prone to crying. Instead, a heavy, suffocating desperation settled deep into the center of my chest, pressing against my ribs. I realized that my family possessed a warmth, a joyful inner circle, and they were actively choosing to keep the door locked. I decided, right then and there in the echoing silence of my spotless living room, that I was going to force my way into the frame. I was going to execute a gesture so undeniably massive, so overwhelmingly generous and spectacular, that they would never be able to look at a family photograph without seeing my face again. Later that exact same afternoon, I opened my laptop and began my campaign. I found Aurelia Ridge Estate. It is an exclusive, ultra-luxury property hidden deep within the rolling, sun-drenched hills of Napa Valley. I did not simply book a standard hotel suite. I reserved a private, standalone architectural marvel of a villa for a full 6 days and 5 nights. The estate operates on a level of extreme exclusivity that practically requires a background check just to process the initial deposit. Because it was a highly guarded private sanctuary, the reservation policies were ironclad. The booking was strictly capped at a maximum of 4 guests. The contract explicitly stated there were to be no exceptions, no extra rollaway beds, and absolutely no additional visitors allowed on the premises at any time. Every single detail, from the security gate access codes to the final billing of incidentals, was rigidly and legally tethered to my personal identification and my primary credit card. I curated an itinerary that left zero room for the familiar, petty tensions that usually plagued our family gatherings. I wanted to eliminate any possibility of stress. I arranged for a private, black luxury sport utility vehicle with a uniformed driver to transport us directly from the airport terminal to the estate gates. I secured a highly coveted reservation on a vintage, high-end wine train that wound through the valley. I booked a private, Michelin-credentialed chef to prepare a customized, 5-course dinner on our sweeping private terrace overlooking the vineyards at sunset. I reserved an entire morning for a private sunrise hot air balloon tour, complete with champagne upon landing. I chose the destination of Napa, specifically because my parents were exactly 3 weeks away from celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary. I convinced myself that this milestone was the perfect, undeniable excuse the ultimate camouflage for my desperate, quiet need to buy their affection. I wanted to place them in an environment so obscenely beautiful, so perfectly insulated and completely devoid of everyday friction, that we would be forced to actually connect as a healthy family. I spent countless hours tailoring the experience to their specific tastes. I ensured the estate's private cellar was stocked with the exact oak-heavy, full-bodied Cabernet my father loved but considered too expensive to ever buy for himself. I booked a 2-hour hot stone and botanical massage specifically tailored to the lavender essential oils my mother always favored. I did not just forward them a sterile confirmation email. I am a corporate crisis manager. I understand the psychological power of presentation. I took my meticulously crafted itinerary to a high-end boutique print shop downtown. I had the documents printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock and bound into a gorgeous matte finish brochure. It looked like a prospectus for a luxury real estate development, complete with high-resolution photographs of the estate and personalized, hour-by-hour daily schedules. I presented this gift at my parents' house in the suburbs on a rainy Tuesday evening. We had just finished dinner. I slid the thick, heavy envelope across the polished wood of the dining room table. When my mother pulled out the bound brochure and read the embossed words, Aurelia Ridge Estate, her hands actually began to tremble. My father, a stoic man who rarely showed any overt emotion, slowly took off his reading glasses and stared across the table at me, completely speechless. Then came Marin. My sister let out a deafening, theatrical squeal, knocked her heavy dining chair backward onto the rug, and threw her arms tightly around my neck. She squeezed me so fiercely I could barely catch my breath. "You are the absolute best sister in the entire world," she cried into my shoulder, her voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. "This is unreal. You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this for us." In that single suspended moment, standing in my parents' dining room with my younger sister's arms wrapped tightly around me and my parents gazing up at me with unfiltered, tearful awe, I felt an intoxicating, overwhelming rush of relief. I had finally done it. I had finally touched the elusive, golden warmth I had been chasing my entire life. For the very first time. I was not the cleanup crew. I was not the emergency fund. I was the beloved architect of our shared happiness. The following 3 weeks of preparation were the happiest I had ever experienced within the dynamic of my family. The atmosphere in our communication shifted entirely. For the first time in my living memory, I was the center of gravity. My mother called me almost every single day during my lunch hour to ask my opinion on resort wear, holding up expensive silk dresses over video chat to see if I thought they fit the Napa aesthetic. My father texted me links to historic vineyards he wanted to point out during our train ride, asking if we could squeeze them into the schedule. Myron created a shared digital photo album and flooded it daily with mood boards for the pictures she wanted the two of us to take together in the hot air balloon. She constantly texted me about how this trip was going to be our ultimate sister bonding experience. I was practically glowing. I walked through my high-stress corporate office with a serene, unshakable smile. I genuinely, foolishly believed that this 6-day luxury retreat was going to permanently rewrite my role in the Graham family. I felt that I had finally purchased my way into the inner circle, securing a spot that could never be taken away. I was entirely consumed by the radiant, blinding illusion of belonging. I was so incredibly busy basking in the warmth of their sudden, undivided attention that I did not notice the subtle chilling shifts in the wind. I did not realize that while I was happily packing my designer luggage and finalizing the dietary restrictions for the private chef menu, the people I loved most in the world were operating entirely behind my back. I was eagerly paying for the grand stage, the brilliant lights, and the entire theater production, completely unaware that someone else was already backstage, quietly rewriting the guest list. It started exactly 2 weeks before our scheduled departure. The flawless, shining facade of my family's excitement began to develop tiny, almost imperceptible hairline fractures. It was nothing overt at first, just a slow drip of casual inquiries that felt completely out of rhythm with the meticulous itinerary I had handed them. Marin called me on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing a risk assessment report for a client, when my phone vibrated. I answered it, expecting her to gush over the wardrobe mood boards she had been sending me all week. Instead, her voice was pitched slightly higher than usual, breathless and artificially bright. "Hey, Kendall?" she chirped, the sound echoing slightly as if she were pacing in an empty room. "I was just looking over the beautiful brochure you made again. It is so utterly gorgeous. I was wondering, though, how strict is the estate about their guest policy? Like, do they actually verify identification at the main gate? Is there any flexibility at all to add one more person to the villa?" I put my pen down, a small knot forming between my shoulder blades. "It is completely inflexible, Marin. It is a highly secured private sanctuary. The contract explicitly caps the occupancy at exactly 4 guests for security and liability reasons. Every single authorization code is tied to my name. Why in the world would we need to add a person? It is just the 4 of us." "Oh, no reason at all." She deflected instantly, letting out a sharp, nervous laugh. "I am just naturally curious about how these ultra-luxury places operate. It is fascinating. And what about the private chef dinner? Can that be changed from a family-style setup to something a bit more? I do not know. Intimately romantic, or the hot air balloon tour? Is the basket private enough to create a true once-in-a-lifetime moment?" I brushed off her bizarre questions as her typical dramatic flair. Marin had a chronic need to aestheticize every waking second of her life for her digital audience. I assumed she just wanted to ensure the lighting and atmosphere would be sufficiently cinematic for her photographs. But then came the sudden, pervasive, and entirely uninvited inclusion of Ty Holloway into our daily family vernacular. Ty was Marin's newest boyfriend. They had been dating for just under 6 months, which, in the chaotic timeline of Marin's romantic life, was practically a silver anniversary. Ty was a man who spoke exclusively in smooth, honeyed pitches. He was currently attempting to launch a boutique, craft wine label, though from what I could gather, his primary business skill consisted of wearing tailored linen shirts and convincing people older and wealthier than him that he was standing on the precipice of massive success. He had a brilliant predatory knack for making my father feel like a shrewd corporate mentor and making my mother feel like a cherished patron of the arts. I had never invited Ty on this trip. I had made it abundantly, crystal clear from the moment I slid that envelope across the dining room table, that this was an intimately closed circle. It was a celebration of my parents' 35th anniversary and a desperately needed chance for our immediate blood family to reconnect. I purchased exactly 4 plane tickets. I reserved exactly 4 seats in the luxury transport vehicle. Yet, Ty's name began to casually drift into every single conversation, floating through the air like an airborne toxin. Ty was explaining to me how incredible the volcanic soil composition is in that specific region of Napa. My father would muse over the phone on a Sunday afternoon. "Ty knows the most wonderful little artisanal cheese distributor right near the estate," my mother would add in our group text message later that same night. They spoke about him as if his presence in the narrative of this vacation was a predetermined fact. The dread began to pool heavily at the base of my stomach on a Thursday night. I was standing in my bathroom, scrolling through my phone while brushing my teeth, and I absent-mindedly tapped on Marin's profile. A temporary story popped up on my screen. It was a blurred, low-light photograph of 2 crystal champagne flutes clinking together. Layered over the image was a line of text that read, "Getting ready for the most romantic week of my entire life." I froze. The mint toothpaste suddenly tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. Before I could even fully process the implication of those words, the screen flickered, and the story vanished. She had deleted it. A sharp, shapeless anxiety pierced straight through my chest, leaving a cold hollow in its wake. The very next morning, my mother called me. Her tone was distinctly hesitant, wrapping her words in thick, suffocating layers of cotton to soften the blow of whatever she was trying to say. "Kendall, sweetheart," she began, clearing her throat delicately. "I know you took some precious time off for this trip, but your father and I were wondering if you might still be tied up with some of those big corporate crises you handle. Will you be busy with online meetings while we are at the estate? Because we could certainly be a little flexible with the schedule if you need to step away and work in your room." "I am not working, Mom," I replied, my voice tightening defensively. I cleared my entire schedule for the next week. I forwarded all my emails to my associates. "This trip is my absolute priority." Of course, she soothed quickly, though the underlying tension in her voice did not dissipate. "It is just that. Well, would you mind terribly if a few specific moments during the trip were not strictly focused on the four of us? If we, perhaps, shifted the spotlight to focus on Marin for a little bit." I felt a creeping coldness wash over my arms. I make my living reading the spaces between words. I analyze human behavior during critical disasters. And my instincts were screaming that a massive, catastrophic truth was being deliberately concealed from me. The architecture of their deceit was casting a long, unmistakable shadow across my perfect plans. But I had been trained, meticulously conditioned over 34 years of my life, to instinctively doubt my own perception whenever I had sensed their blatant favoritism in the past. I was firmly told that I was being overly sensitive, too rigid, too unyielding. I was taught that my intuition was just jealousy disguised as logic. So, sitting in my pristine office, staring out at the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, I forced the cold dread back down into my stomach. I actively gaslit myself. I told myself I was projecting my own deep-seated childhood insecurities onto perfectly innocent logistical questions. I convinced myself that my parents were just excited, that Marin was just being her usual dramatic self, and that I was completely overthinking it. I wanted the illusion of their love so badly that I chose to ignore the smell of smoke. What I did not know, what I could not have possibly anticipated in my desperate, blind desire to trust my family, was the sheer magnitude of the parasite that had attached itself to my gift. Ty Holloway had not just been offering casual wine recommendations to my parents. He had been quietly, systematically operating a shadow itinerary entirely parallel to mine. While I was carefully finalizing the allergy requirements for our private chef menu, Ty was secretly exchanging detailed emails with a highly sought-after, incredibly expensive local photographer based in Napa Valley, while I was confirming the exact pickup time for our private airport transport. He was coordinating a clandestine afternoon meeting with a major regional wine distribution partner. Ty had looked at the 6-day ultra-luxury vacation that I was financing with my own relentless hard work, and he had not seen a generous, heartfelt family gesture. He had looked at my itinerary and seen a fully funded, exquisitely styled stage. He was actively planning to use the breathtaking private vineyards, the exclusive hot air balloon tour, and the Michelin-starred dining experiences that I had meticulously paid for as the free backdrop for a spectacular, heavily documented marriage proposal. And more than that, he intended to leverage the extreme prestige of the Aurelia Ridge estate to impress his prospective business investors. He was going to bring a distributor onto the property I rented, essentially passing off my immense purchasing power as his own glamorous, successful lifestyle. I was entirely blind to the steel jaws of the trap closing around me. I thought I was simply fighting off my own lingering paranoia. I had absolutely no idea that I was not just on the verge of being physically pushed out of my own vacation. I was about to be seamlessly transformed into the invisible, unacknowledged financial sponsor for a mediocre man's fabricated dream. And my own parents were the ones holding the door open for him. The morning of our departure was crisp and unseasonably bright. I woke up at exactly 5 a.m. without the assistance of an alarm. For the first time in perhaps a decade, the familiar weight of dread that usually accompanied a family gathering was entirely absent from my chest. Instead, a rare, unfamiliar flutter of genuine excitement had taken its place. I had packed my bags the night before, carefully folding the silk evening dresses and the cashmere wraps I envisioned wearing on the private terrace overlooking the vineyards. I drove my car out of the city and toward the sprawling suburbs where my parents lived. The drive took exactly 45 minutes. I spent the entire duration listening to a classical music station, feeling an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. I truly believed I was driving toward a new era of my life. I parked my car in their wide driveway, pulled my heavy, structured leather suitcase from the trunk, and walked up the front path. I unlocked the front door with my spare key. I expected the usual frantic energy that preceded our family trips, with my mother anxiously checking the oven and my father pacing the hallway with printed boarding passes. Instead, the house was suffocatingly quiet. I wheeled my suitcase into the formal living room, the wheels gliding silently over the hardwood floor. I stopped dead in my tracks. There, sitting comfortably in my mother's favorite floral armchair, was Ty Holloway. His legs were casually crossed at the ankle. He was wearing a tailored, light blue linen shirt and holding a ceramic mug of my father's expensive dark roast coffee. Resting directly beside his leather loafers, lined up perfectly against the oak baseboards near the front door, was a set of canvas luggage. The atmosphere in the room was instantly oppressive. It was thick with the distinct, electric tension of people who had been waiting for a bomb to detonate. The visual evidence of the betrayal was so sudden, so glaringly obvious, that my brain initially refused to process it. I stood frozen in the archway, my hand still tightly gripping the handle of my suitcase. I looked at my mother. Elise was standing near the fireplace mantel, frantically wiping down an already spotless framed photograph with the edge of her sleeve. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red the second she made eye contact with me, and she immediately looked down at the carpet. I shifted my gaze to my father. Douglas was standing by the large bay window, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring intensely at the empty street outside as if he were monitoring a severe weather system. Marin was curled up on the edge of the velvet sofa. She had her knees pulled tightly to her chest and was staring at the glowing screen of her cellular phone with a manufactured intensity, completely refusing to lift her chin. And then there was Ty. He did not look guilty. He did not look uncomfortable. He looked directly at me and offered a smooth, practiced, and deeply victorious smile. It was the smile of a man who knew he had successfully infiltrated a fortress without having to pick a single lock. "Good morning, Kendall," Ty said, his voice dripping with that artificial, syrupy charm. "Right on time, as always." I did not acknowledge his greeting. I turned my head slowly and fixed my gaze firmly on my father's back. "Dad," I said. My voice did not shake. It came out flat, hollow, and completely devoid of inflection. "Why is Ty's luggage sitting next to the front door?" Douglas finally turned around. He cleared his throat loudly, adopting the exact same authoritative, diplomatic tone he used when negotiating difficult contracts at his firm. He squared his shoulders, attempting to frame the unthinkable as a perfectly logical business proposition. "Now, Kendall, please just come into the room and sit down for a moment," Douglas began, gesturing vaguely toward the empty love seat. "We need to have a calm, rational discussion about the logistics of this trip. Marin and Ty are at a very serious, critical juncture in their relationship. Ty came to us privately and expressed his desire to create a truly spectacular, unforgettable surprise for your sister. They have been looking at properties in Napa for a while now, and well, we all sat down and realized that this current trip is quite simply the perfect occasion." I stared at him, my brain methodically translating his corporate jargon into the brutal truth. "The villa has a strict maximum capacity of exactly 4 guests, I said, reciting the rule I had drilled into them for the past 3 weeks. "The estate does not allow visitors. The guest list is locked." "Exactly," my father agreed, pointing a finger at me as if I had just solved a complex equation, "which is why we had to make a slight adjustment to the passenger manifest. We discussed it as a family, and we all concluded that you would be the most understanding person in this situation. You are always so fiercely independent. Kendall, We figured you could step aside and yield your spot just this one time. Let Marin and Ty have this beautiful moment. You can always book yourself a nice, quiet weekend away somewhere else later this year. Consider it your contribution to your sister's future." He was standing in his own living room, looking me directly in the eyes, and asking me to quietly erase myself from the vacation I had meticulously planned and paid for, simply so a mediocre man could use my money as a romantic prop, before I could even formulate a response. My mother rushed into the conversation, desperately trying to wrap the raw cruelty of their decision in a thick layer of maternal sweetness. "It really is for the best, sweetheart," Elise said, her voice trembling slightly as she took a tentative step toward me. "You are always so incredibly busy with your corporate crises anyway. You are so pragmatic, so focused on reality. You probably would not even enjoy all that sappy, romantic stuff we have planned for the week. It would bore you to tears to sit around watching couples hold hands. This way, you do not have to interrupt your workflow, and Marin gets the cinematic milestone she has always dreamed of." She was using my carefully constructed independence, the very armor I built to survive their neglect, as the weapon to execute my removal. They were not just taking the trip away from me, they were convincing themselves they were doing me a favor by doing it. Marin finally looked up from her screen. There was not a single ounce of shame or remorse in her wide, expressive eyes. She looked entirely justified. "You really should be happy for me, Kendall," Marin said, her tone laced with a sickening innocence. "This is going to be the most important week of my life. You get to be the person who helped make it happen. I promise I will record absolutely everything. I will send you so many videos and pictures. It will feel exactly like you were there with us." A sharp, ringing silence descended upon the room. The sheer magnitude of their audacity was so immense it almost defied gravity. I looked at the three of them, the family I had spent 34 years bleeding myself dry to impress. "When exactly did the three of you sit down and decide this?" I asked. The words cut through the heavy air like a scalpel. My parents exchanged a swift, panicked glance. My father shifted his weight awkwardly from his left foot to his right foot. "Well," Douglas muttered, suddenly finding the pattern of the area rug fascinating. "We finalized the logistics on Tuesday evening, after dinner." Tuesday evening. 3 entire days ago. They had decided to sever me from the trip 3 days ago. For 3 days. They watched me send them updated weather forecasts for the valley. For 3 days. They let me confirm their dietary preferences with the private chef. For 3 days. They allowed me to pack my bags and drive to their house, fully intending to ambush me at the very last possible second. "Why did you wait until right now to tell me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Because we knew you would overreact," my mother blurted out, defensive and sharp. "You can be so rigid about your plans. Kendall, we knew if we told you earlier, you would make a massive scene and try to ruin the surprise. We just wanted to avoid the drama." The betrayal was absolute. It did not just break my heart. It pulverized the very concept of my family into fine dust. They did not just want my money, they wanted my submission. They wanted me to bow out gracefully, to swallow the humiliation without making a sound, so they could enjoy my luxury without the inconvenience of my presence. A strange, profound physiological shift happened inside my body at that exact second. The decades of accumulated hurt, the desperate yearning for their approval, the agonizing fear of being left behind. It all flash froze. The burning pain in my chest instantly transformed into an absolute, crystalline coldness. I saw them not as my parents and my sister, but as deeply flawed, selfish strangers who had been robbing me blind my entire life. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not demand the money back. I did not point a finger at Ty and tell him he was a fraud. I realized, with absolute clarity, that arguing with them would require me to care about their opinions, and I simply did not care anymore. I looked at my mother's nervous, fluttering hands. I looked at my father's cowardly, averted gaze. I looked at Marin's entitled, spoiled face. Finally, I looked at Ty's smug, punchable smile. I gave them a single, very slight nod of my head. I did not utter a single word in response. I gripped the leather handle of my suitcase, turned sharply on my heel, and walked straight out the front door. I pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me, the mechanical click of the lock sounding like a gunshot in the quiet suburban morning. As I walked down the concrete path toward my car, I could faintly hear the collective, heavy exhale of relief from inside the living room. I knew exactly what they were thinking. They thought I had retreated. They thought I had accepted my role as the sacrificial lamb, that I was quietly driving back to the city to lick my wounds while they jetted off to paradise. They thought the conflict was over. They had absolutely no idea that I was not retreating. I was just finding a quiet place to burn their entire paradise to the ground. I drove exactly 4 blocks away from my parents' house before I pulled my car into the empty parking lot of a closed suburban strip mall. The morning sun was just beginning to cut through the overcast sky, casting long, sharp shadows across the cracked asphalt. I put the transmission into park, turned off the engine, and let my hands drop heavily from the leather steering wheel. For a long, uninterrupted moment, I just sat there in the heavy silence of the cabin. The adrenaline that had carried me out of their front door, the instinct that had kept my spine completely rigid, suddenly evaporated. In its place, it left behind a sharp, breathtaking agony. It felt as though someone had physically cracked my ribs open and poured ice water directly over my lungs. I allowed the pain to run its full, devastating course through my bloodstream. I did not fight it. I let the absolute reality of what my mother, my father, and my sister had just done wash over me. They had looked me in the eyes, in the house where I grew up, and told me I was entirely expendable. But I am a professional crisis manager. I have spent my entire adult life training my brain to compartmentalize catastrophic emotional damage and convert it into a highly actionable, systematic checklist. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I closed my eyes, visualized the terrified, desperate version of myself who had booked this trip to buy their love, and I quietly locked her away forever. When I opened my eyes again, the tears had completely receded. The daughter who wanted to be chosen was gone. The crisis manager had taken the wheel. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my tablet. I opened my primary email inbox and pulled up the meticulously organized folder labeled Napa Valley. I stared at the glowing screen, a dark, cynical humor slowly blooming in my chest as I reviewed the logistical reality of the vacation they had just hijacked. It was a staggering display of arrogance and pure logistical incompetence on their part. In their eager rush to replace me with Ty Holloway, my family had entirely overlooked the fundamental mechanics of ultra-luxury travel. They were so accustomed to me quietly handling the complicated, unglamorous back end of our lives that they assumed the infrastructure of this trip would simply sustain itself without my presence. They assumed they could simply step into the itinerary I had built, exactly like stepping into a warm bath someone else had drawn. But high-end hospitality does not operate on the honor system. Every single reservation, every deposit, every security clearance was irrevocably anchored to my identity. The private estate, the customized tours, the transport vehicles, all of it required the physical presence of the primary account holder. It required my government-issued identification and the physical insertion of the platinum credit card I carried in my wallet to authorize check-in and cover incidental damages. Even if I had simply driven home and gone to sleep, they would not have been able to access a single second of the trip. But I was not going to leave it to chance. I was not going to let them stand at a velvet rope and try to negotiate their way in. I was going to dismantle the entire infrastructure. I tapped the first number on my screen. I called the elite black car transportation service I had contracted. A polite representative answered on the second ring. I instructed him to cancel the luxury sport utility vehicle that was scheduled to arrive at my parents' address in exactly 2 hours. He informed me, his voice thoroughly apologetic, that canceling within 24 hours of the pickup time would incur a penalty fee of $600. That is perfectly acceptable, I replied, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of hesitation. Please process the cancellation immediately and email me the receipt. I hung up the phone. I viewed that $600 not as a penalty, but as the incredibly cheap cost of a funeral for my old, compliant self. Next, I dismantled the experiences. I called the Michelin-credentialed private chef and canceled the 5-course sunset dinner. The culinary coordinator was surprised, but processed the request when I agreed to forfeit the retainer without argument. I moved to the spa, systematically erasing the 2-hour hot stone and botanical treatments. I contacted the hot air balloon touring company and wiped our names from the Sunrise flight manifest. With every single click, with every polite confirmation number I jotted down on a digital notepad, the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for my entire life grew lighter. I was severing the invisible strings that had tied me to their expectations. Finally, I arrived at the cornerstone of the entire trip. I called the private concierge desk at Aurelia Ridge Estate. The estate manager, a woman named Victoria whose voice radiated polished authority, answered the line. "Victoria, this is Kendall Graham," I said, leaning back against the leather headrest of my car. "I am calling to formally cancel my reservation for the private villa, effective immediately." There was a brief pause on the line, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. "Ms. Graham, I'm so sorry to hear that. I do need to remind you, as per the contract you signed, a same-day cancellation means you will forfeit the entirety of your $25,000 deposit. The estate cannot offer a refund at this late stage. I am fully aware of the financial terms. Victoria, please release the property back into your inventory," I instructed. I did not flinch at the staggering financial loss. I had spent my entire adult life throwing money into the bottomless pit of my family's needs. This was the very last check I would ever write on their behalf. Before she disconnected, I asked one final, crucial question. "Victoria, hypothetically speaking, if I had not called to cancel, and a party of 4 adults arrived at your security gates this afternoon claiming to be my guests, but I was not physically with them and my credit card was not present, what would be your protocol? Our anti-fraud and security policies are absolute, Ms. Graham," Victoria answered without a second of hesitation. "We require the primary booking guest to present matching identification and the exact credit card used for the deposit upon arrival. If you were not in the vehicle, security would deny them entry at the main gate. They would not even reach the reception desk." "Thank you, Victoria. That is exactly what I needed to know," I said. A profound, icy satisfaction settling into my bones. I ended the call. I placed my tablet on the passenger seat. My phone lay in the center console, completely silent. I did not open my messaging application. I did not draft a furious, emotionally charged text message to my mother or my sister. I did not send Ty a warning that his grand, stolen stage had just been demolished. For decades, I had been the person who absorbed the blow and then carefully explained why I was hurt, only to have my feelings completely invalidated. I had always believed that I owed them a warning, that I owed them an explanation, that I owed them a graceful exit. But sitting in that quiet car, I finally understood the fundamental rule of the game they had been playing. The person who is unceremoniously shoved out of the lifeboat does not have an obligation to teach the people left on board how to row. They had chosen to orchestrate this betrayal in secret. They had calculated that keeping me in the dark until the final hour was the best way to secure my money without dealing with my presence. They had wanted a surprise. I was simply ensuring they received one. I looked at the digital clock on my dashboard. It had taken me exactly 18 minutes to systematically erase a trip that had taken me months to build and cost me tens of thousands of dollars. 18 minutes to dismantle an illusion I had nurtured for over 30 years. I put the car back into drive. I did not feel a sudden, cinematic urge to scream or cry. I did not feel the fiery, chaotic burn of revenge. As I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the highway heading back toward the downtown skyline, I felt something entirely different. For the very first time in my entire existence, the chaotic, desperate noise of my family was gone. I felt quiet. It was a cold, terrifying, and absolutely beautiful silence. I did not have to be physically present to witness the spectacular collapse of their stolen vacation. I simply sat on my velvet sofa in Chicago, holding a cup of herbal tea, and watched the disaster unfold in real time across the glowing screen of my cellular phone. The timeline of their punishment was delivered to me through a frantic, escalating series of text messages and breathless voicemails. I pieced the entire miserable morning together with the cold, clinical precision of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt company. The black luxury transport vehicle was scheduled to arrive at my parents' suburban driveway at exactly 8 in the morning. At 5 minutes past 8, my phone vibrated with the first text message from my mother. It was mildly annoyed, assuming a simple logistical error. "Kendall, the driver is late. Could you please call the dispatcher and give them a nudge?" 10 minutes later, the tone shifted from annoyance to outright panic. "Kendall, the dispatcher said the reservation was canceled. What is going on? We have a flight to catch. Fix this immediately." I did not reply. I placed my phone face down on the coffee table and took a slow sip of my tea. Without the spacious, climate-controlled sanctuary of the hired vehicle, reality immediately bared its teeth. They were forced to drag their luggage back across the lawn and cram into my father's 10-year-old mid-size utility vehicle. My mother's frantic voicemails painted a vivid, pathetic masterpiece. They had to shove 4 adults, 3 oversized hard-shell suitcases, and Ty's heavy aluminum cases of camera equipment into a cabin designed for running local errands. Marin was instantly furious. The delicate, expensive dresses she had packed specifically for her picturesque proposal were being crushed beneath camera tripods. Ty was violently irritated that his filming gear was being jostled. The curated, cinematic atmosphere they had planned for their morning was instantly replaced by the smell of stale upholstery and the sound of my father cursing at the morning traffic. Yet, the most astonishing part of their morning was their sheer, bulletproof delusion. As they rushed through the airport security lines and boarded their commercial flight, they genuinely believed that the canceled car was the extent of the damage. In their minds, I was merely throwing a childish tantrum. They reasoned that I had canceled the ride to the airport as a petty act of rebellion, but they firmly believed that once they landed in California, the gates of paradise would still be wide open. They had spent 3 decades watching me swallow my pride and fix their mistakes. They simply could not fathom a universe where I would actually pull the financial rug out from under them entirely. They landed in San Francisco, rented a standard car, and drove north toward the sprawling, sun-drenched valleys. I can perfectly envision the exact moment their arrogant optimism drove straight into a brick wall. They pulled up to the imposing wrought iron security gates of Aurelia Ridge Estate. Douglas rolled down his window, undoubtedly wearing his most authoritative corporate expression, ready to announce his arrival to the uniformed guard. "Reservation for the Graham family," my father would have said, expecting the heavy gates to silently part. Instead, the security guard checked his digital ledger, shook his head, and delivered the executioner's blow. "I apologize, sir, but there is no active reservation under that name. The booking was canceled by the primary account holder this morning. All access codes and associated property services are completely void." My phone practically caught fire. My mother left 3 consecutive voicemails. In the first one, she was commanding me to call the estate manager and clear up this embarrassing misunderstanding. By the 3rd voicemail, her voice had devolved into a shrill, hysterical pitch. The security personnel had not just turned them away, they had politely asked my father to reverse his vehicle out of the private driveway because they were blocking the entrance for actual, paying guests. But the cancellation of the villa was only the first layer of the catastrophe. The true, devastating shockwave hit when the collateral damage of Ty's secret agenda began to detonate. Standing in the gravel turnout of a public highway, entirely locked out of the luxury estate, Ty was forced to make his own panicked phone calls. He had to contact the highly sought-after local photographer he had hired, a man who was currently waiting at a private, exclusive vineyard that Ty no longer had authorization to enter. Worse still, Ty had to call the regional boutique wine distributor he had aggressively courted. Ty had promised this vital investor a private, catered afternoon at a world-class estate to discuss a lucrative partnership. Now, the only venue Ty could offer was the parking lot of a public roadside diner. It was in that desperate, humiliating moment on the side of the highway that the romantic facade entirely shattered. Maureen, standing next to the rental car, listened to her perfect boyfriend frantically try to salvage his business meeting. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. Ty had not orchestrated this grand Napa Valley takeover simply because he was overwhelmed by his love for her. He had hijacked my vacation because it was a free, high-end commercial set. He intended to use the luxurious backdrop I paid for to elevate his own brand identity and secure funding for his mediocre business. Maureen realized, in real time, that she was not the star of a romantic fairy tale. She was merely a convenient prop in Ty's financial pitch deck. The aesthetic, perfectly curated illusion of their relationship dissolved right there on the asphalt. Marin began screaming at Ty, accusing him of using her family for clout. Ty, stripped of his smooth, honeyed charm and facing the collapse of his business deal, snapped back, blaming my family for being disorganized and ruining his professional reputation. With no luxury villa, no private chef, and the sun beginning to set, they faced a brutal logistical nightmare. Napa Valley on a beautiful autumn weekend operates at maximum capacity. Every luxury resort, every boutique inn, and every standard hotel within a 30-mile radius was entirely booked. They spent 3 agonizing hours driving up and down the highway, rejection after rejection compounding their misery. Eventually, sheer exhaustion forced them to surrender. They managed to secure the very last available room at a dilapidated, budget motel located 45 minutes away from the main valley. It was the kind of establishment that featured a flickering neon sign, aggressively stained carpets, and heavily barred windows. Instead of clinking crystal glasses of vintage Cabernet on a private terrace overlooking miles of rolling vineyards, they spent their first evening crammed into a single, aggressively lit room with 2 sagging double beds. The scent of lavender essential oils they had anticipated was replaced by the overwhelming stench of cheap industrial bleach and old cigarette smoke. There was no engagement ring presented. There was no celebratory dinner. There was only a suffocating, claustrophobic box filled with 4 profoundly selfish people who had finally run out of runway. Through a furious text message sent by my mother later that night, I learned exactly how the evening ended. The 4 of them sat in that cramped motel room and tore each other to absolute shreds. Douglas blamed Ty for overstepping and causing the logistical disaster. Ty blamed Douglas for raising a deeply vindictive, uncooperative daughter. Marin sobbed uncontrollably, blaming both her parents and her boyfriend for ruining the most important week of her life. And hovering over all of their bitter, venomous arguing was my name, Kendall. For 34 years, my name had been synonymous with safety, with financial bailouts, and with quiet, obedient service. But that night, echoing off the thin, cheap walls of a highway motel, my name was spoken like a terrifying curse. It was the name of the nightmare they had actively created. A nightmare they suddenly realized they had absolutely no power to control. They returned to the city of Chicago exactly 4 days after the morning I left them standing in my parents' living room. I knew their miserable, budget motel exile had ended not because they reached out to me with an apology, but because the toxic fallout immediately began to seep through the extended family grapevine. Douglas and Elise did not spend their return flight engaging in quiet, humble self-reflection. When abusive people lose their unearned privileges, they do not experience remorse. They experience a violent, righteous indignation. Instead of admitting they had tried to steal a $25,000 vacation, my parents launched a preemptive, highly coordinated smear campaign. They needed to control the narrative before the truth could expose their grotesque favoritism. My mother spent her entire weekend making hushed, theatrical phone calls to my aunts, my uncles, and our oldest family friends. She spun a tragic, deeply elaborate tale about my supposed mental decline, Elise claimed, in a voice trembling with manufactured maternal sorrow, that I had suffered a massive, uncontrollable psychological breakdown. She told them I was completely consumed by a bitter, unnatural jealousy over Marin's relationship. Douglas backed her up flawlessly. He attended his weekly golf game and casually informed his brothers that the immense pressure of my corporate career had finally shattered my fragile grip on reality. He painted a picture of a sad, lonely, career-obsessed woman who had lashed out and intentionally sabotaged a beautiful family milestone out of pure, unadulterated spite. They transformed my absolute boundary into an act of unhinged aggression. Marin, naturally, weaponized her digital audience. She spent the week posting a series of cryptic, aesthetically pleasing videos. She sat in front of a ring light, wearing oversized sweaters, talking mournfully about the pain of toxic family dynamics. She told her followers about the profound trauma of having an older sister who, in her exact words, utterly hates seeing other people experience true happiness. Marin seamlessly twisted a staggering act of blatant theft into a melodramatic soap opera. In her twisted version of reality, she was the innocent, persecuted protagonist whose fairy tale had been ruined by a wicked, joyless villain. Then came the formal correspondence from Ty Holloway. He did not possess the basic human courage to call my phone or look me in the eye. Instead, he drafted a lengthy, profoundly condescending email and sent it directly to my professional corporate address. It arrived in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. I sat at my mahogany desk, surrounded by high-level risk assessment reports, and read his message twice, absolutely mesmerized by the sheer, staggering magnitude of his audacity. Ty accused me of being a financially abusive tyrant. He wrote that my petty, hysterical reaction had destroyed a literal, life-changing moment for the woman he loved. He claimed I was deeply unwell and needed professional help, but the most revealing part of his message was buried in the third paragraph. In a fit of arrogant anger, Ty explicitly complained that my sudden cancellation had cost him significant professional credibility. He lamented that I had ruined a critical, career-defining networking opportunity with his regional wine investors by leaving him stranded without a luxury venue. He actually typed those words out and pressed send. By complaining about his lost business deal, Ty inadvertently confessed to the very crime he was trying to hide. He fundamentally, genuinely believed that the vacation I financed with my own labor was a communal asset that rightfully belonged to him. He was not angry that a family trip was ruined. He was furious that his free, high-end commercial film set had been repossessed by the owner. But the most crucial piece of evidence, the devastating strike that completely altered the trajectory of my retaliation, arrived late on a Thursday evening. My phone vibrated softly on my kitchen counter. It was a direct message from Natalie Cross. Natalie is the daughter of my mother's younger sister. We were never particularly close growing up, primarily because my mother always kept our immediate family slightly isolated from the extended relatives to maintain the flawless illusion of our perfection. But Natalie had always possessed a sharp, unclouded perspective on our family dynamics. "Kendall," Natalie wrote, her message popping up on the screen. "I know Aunt Elise is telling everyone in the family that you went completely crazy and canceled the trip out of nowhere just to be mean. I did not believe her for a single second. I think you really need to see this." Attached to her text message were 3 distinct, high-resolution screenshots. They were captured directly from a private, locked group chat that Marin maintained with her tightest inner circle of friends. I checked the timestamps printed at the top of the images. They were dated a full 2 weeks before the morning of our scheduled departure. 2 entire weeks before I even suspected a single thing was wrong. I zoomed in on the first image. Marin had sent a photograph of the luxurious, custom-bound itinerary brochure I had proudly printed for them. Beneath the picture, Marin wrote. Do not worry about the guest limit. Girls, Ty is absolutely coming. We are going to make it a surprise proposal trip. Kendall will get the hint and bow out at the last minute. She always does. In the second screenshot, one of Marin's friends asked a logical question. She asked what would happen if I actually stood my ground and wanted to stay in the luxury villa that I had paid for. Marin's reply was a masterclass in casual, breathtaking cruelty. She responded with a laughing emoji and typed, Kendall is way better suited for paying the bill than actually appearing in the frame. It will be totally fine. She has the emotional range of a brick wall anyway. She will just go back to work. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone until the edges of my vision began to blur. A chilling, absolute wave of clarity washed over my entire body. This was not a last-minute, impulsive mistake fueled by sudden romantic excitement. This was a deliberate, calculated, and highly premeditated conspiracy. They had spoken about it openly. They had strategized. They had actively, maliciously banked on my lifelong habit of enduring their disrespect. They truly believed I was so thoroughly broken, so deeply conditioned to accept the absolute minimum scraps of their affection, that I would simply fund their massive betrayal, hand over the keys, and quietly disappear into the background like a well-trained servant. The old Kendall, the desperate, yearning daughter who wanted nothing more than a seat at their table, would have immediately drafted a frantic, emotional defense. She would have called every single aunt and uncle, crying, pleading, and desperately trying to convince them of her innocence. She would have begged them to see the truth. But that desperate woman died in a suburban parking lot a week ago. I did not reply to Ty Holloway's pathetic email. I did not engage with my parents' frantic, face-saving lies. I did not post a single defensive statement on my social media accounts. Instead, I poured a glass of cold water, sat down at my desk, and opened a secure, encrypted folder on my personal computer. I began to treat my own family exactly like a hostile corporate entity that was actively trying to destroy my client. I saved the condescending email from Ty. I saved the frantic, demanding voicemails my mother left me while they were locked out of the estate gates. I downloaded and securely backed up the screenshots Natalie had provided. I meticulously archived the original luxury estate contract, the unalterable guest policy, and the bank statements proving that every single dollar had originated exclusively from my personal accounts. I compiled a watertight, chronological, legally undeniable dossier of their deceit. I was no longer interested in defending myself. I was no longer trying to prove to anyone that I was a good sister or an understanding daughter. The parameters of the war had fundamentally shifted beneath their feet, and they did not even know it yet. This was no longer just a petty dispute over a canceled luxury vacation. It was a methodical, unsparing excavation of the truth. I was going to tear down the false, glittering narrative they had built their entire lives upon. I was going to expose exactly who the real victim had always been, and show the entire world exactly who had survived for 3 decades by quietly, ruthlessly draining the life out of someone else. The weeks following the Napa Valley implosion were the quietest, most profoundly peaceful period of my entire adult life. I simply stopped functioning as the Graham family emergency hotline. When my cellular phone screen lit up with a hysterical text message from my mother or a passive-aggressive, demanding voicemail from my father, I did not answer. I muted their numbers entirely. At the firm, I volunteered to lead a massive high-stakes corporate merger project that kept me occupied for 60 hours a week. I threw myself into the complex, logical world of corporate risk, where actions had direct consequences and contracts were strictly honored. On my days off, instead of preemptively solving Marin's financial disasters or rushing to the suburbs to soothe my mother's anxieties, I drove out to the state parks. I hiked for miles through the dense, silent woods, breathing in the crisp, unbothered air. I reconnected with university friends I had neglected for years because my weekends were previously always held hostage by sudden family obligations. For the very first time in my existence, I felt the borders of my life expand. I was no longer a tightly wound spring, constantly compressing myself to absorb the shock of their chaotic lives. The sheer volume of free time and disposable income I suddenly possessed was staggering. I was having dinner with my closest friend, Sarah, at a quiet, dimly lit Italian restaurant downtown when the reality of my situation finally crystallized. I was explaining the bizarre, highly coordinated smear campaign my parents were running through the extended family. I marveled at how aggressively they were trying to paint me as the unstable, jealous villain of their story. Sarah took a slow sip of her red wine, set her crystal glass down on the white tablecloth, and looked at me with absolute, unwavering clarity. "Kendall, you have to understand something fundamental about parasitic systems," she said softly, leaning across the table. "They are not losing their minds because you did something morally wrong. They are panicking because you are refusing to play your assigned role. The entire ecosystem of your family relied on you being the invisible, indestructible shock absorber. You stepped out of the machine, and now their gears are grinding together and breaking. They are furious that they actually have to face the real, unvarnished consequences of their own actions. You were never a daughter to them. Kendall, you were infrastructure." Her words felt like a physical strike to my chest. She was completely, undeniably right. I was not the villain. I was simply the load-bearing pillar they had arrogantly yanked out from under their own house. I truly believed I had uncovered the absolute bottom of their betrayal. But the universe had a few more cruel, highly specific details to deliver. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing client files. I received a forwarded email from Victoria, the meticulously professional estate manager at Aurelia Ridge. She sent it with a brief note attached, stating that she was conducting a routine end-of-month audit of canceled itineraries and thought I should see a piece of correspondence regarding my closed account. I scrolled down and read the original message. It was from Ty Holloway, sent directly to the estate's event coordination team a full 10 days before our scheduled departure. "To whom it may concern," Ty had written, his tone dripping with unearned authority. "My girlfriend's family is currently being sponsored for a luxury stay at your property next week. As a rising entrepreneur in the boutique craft wine sector, I would like to inquire about your policies regarding commercial videography on the grounds. I am planning to invite a major regional distributor for a private tasting and brand consultation during our stay, and I need to ensure the estate can serve as a suitable, high-end backdrop for my professional content. Sponsored." He actually used the word sponsored. He did not view my $25,000 gesture as a heartfelt gift from a devoted older sister. He viewed it as a corporate grant. He saw me as a faceless, nameless financial backer providing a free luxury set for his mediocre brand. He had absolutely zero respect for the woman actually paying the bill. He thought my money was just an unbranded asset waiting for his personal logo. The anger that flared in my chest was instantly eclipsed by a second, far more devastating administrative revelation later that week. I logged into my personal portal for the luxury touring company we had booked for the hot air balloon ride, simply to ensure the final portion of my partial refund had fully processed into my checking account. While clicking through the digital archive, I noticed a resolved customer service ticket attached to my reservation history. I opened it out of pure curiosity. It was a direct transcript of an online chat between the company's support agent and a guest. The guest had verified their identity using my specific booking reference number. It was Marin. "Hello?" Marin had typed. "I need to urgently update the primary guest name on this reservation. My sister booked it for our family, but she might not be attending the morning flight anymore due to work. I need to transfer the primary authorization and liability waiver to my boyfriend, Ty Holloway, so we can coordinate the champagne landing without her having to be present to sign. How do we bypass the original cardholder requirement in your system?" I sat back in my heavy leather desk chair. The breath knocked completely out of my lungs. The sheer predatory calculation of her message was terrifying. She had not just hoped I would naturally get the hint and bow out gracefully. She had actively, methodically tried to erase my legal presence from the itinerary behind my back. She was trying to strip my name off the very experiences I bought, so she and Ty could claim absolute, uncontested ownership of the event. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a cold, calculated administrative assassination. The heavy silence from my parents finally broke exactly 1 week before my grandmother's 70th birthday. My father sent a tightly worded, highly sanitized email to my personal address. There was no greeting. There was certainly no apology. There was no acknowledgement of the agonizing pain they had caused or the money they had tried to steal. Kendall, Douglas wrote, your grandmother is turning 70 next Saturday. The entire extended family will be gathering at the country club for a formal luncheon. Your mother and I expect you to attend. It is time for you to cool down and stop this childish, dramatic silent treatment. We have a family reputation to maintain in this community, and your stubborn absence will cause unnecessary embarrassment and questions we simply do not wish to answer. Put your petty grievances aside, act like an adult, and show up for your family. I read the words over and over. They wanted me to simply slot back into my designated space. They wanted me to smile for the photographs, eat the expensive cake, and pretend the foundation of our relationship had not been completely incinerated. They wanted the optics of a perfect, unbroken family, and they demanded I provide the visual proof. I replied 20 minutes later with a single, definitive word. Confirmed. I did not agree to attend because I wanted to reconcile. I agreed to go for one reason and one reason only. My grandmother was the only person in that entire bloodline who had ever looked at me and loved me without requiring me to fix a crisis first. When I was a child, she was the one who listened to me talk about my interests while my parents fawned over Marin's endless theater tantrums. She was the one who mailed me handwritten cards when I got my first corporate promotion. She deserved to see me on her milestone birthday. But I was absolutely not walking into that country club as the compliant, silent daughter they expected. I spent the entire evening before the party standing in front of my home printer. I printed Ty's arrogant, self-incriminating email to the estate manager. I printed the customer service transcript of Marin trying to legally steal my reservation. I printed the high-resolution screenshots of Marin mocking my role as the family wallet. I printed the non-refundable cancellation receipts showing the sheer, staggering financial weight of what they tried to hijack. I took every single piece of paper, folded them with absolute, razor-sharp precision, and slid them into a single, thin manila envelope. As I dressed for the party the next morning, pulling on a tailored, dark navy suit that felt like modern armor, I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not look tired. I did not look defeated. I looked like a woman who was finally ready to burn the theater to the ground. I picked up the thin envelope from my kitchen counter, feeling the tremendous, devastating weight of the truth inside it. It was time to show the entire extended family exactly who the Graham family really was. I arrived at the Oakbrook Country Club at exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The grand crystal-lit ballroom was already filled with the low, steady hum of 50 extended relatives chatting over classical background music. Before I could even hand my heavy trench coat to the cloakroom attendant, my father materialized from the crowd, his face set in a rigid mask of suppressed, frantic anger. My mother was trailing nervously right behind him, wringing her hands together. "You are going to walk over there right now and apologize to your sister," Douglas hissed, his voice pitched dangerously low so the passing waiters carrying trays of champagne would not hear. "You ruined the most important week of her life, and you severely jeopardized her future with Ty. You will make this right today." Elise grabbed my elbow, her fingers digging desperately into the fine fabric of my tailored suit. "Please, Kendall," she whispered frantically, her eyes darting around the room. "Do not make a scene. Everyone is watching us. Just swallow your pride and be the bigger person for one afternoon." I pulled my arm firmly out of my mother's grip. I walked right past them and stepped directly into the center of the crowded ballroom. Myron was standing near the towering floral arrangement by the buffet tables, surrounded by 2 of my aunts and a handful of older cousins. She was holding a white cocktail napkin, delicately dabbing at her completely dry eyes, fully immersed in playing the role of the tragically wronged heroine. "I just do not understand how she could be so vindictive," Marin was saying, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed sorrow. Ty had this beautiful, once-in-a-lifetime proposal planned, and Kendall canceled the whole trip just because she could not handle the idea of me getting married first. "She just hates seeing me truly happy." The surrounding relatives murmured in deep sympathy, shaking their heads at my supposed cruelty. Marin looked up and saw me standing there. She paused. She fully expected me to shrink. She expected me to do exactly what I had done for 34 years, stay completely silent, absorb the toxic blame, and quietly retreat to the shadowy corners of the room. I did not retreat. I walked directly to the large, circular gift table in the exact center of the room. I looked around at the faces of my aunts, my uncles, and my cousins. The ambient chatter of the party slowly died down until the sprawling ballroom was completely, suffocatingly silent. "Does everyone here want to know exactly what happened in Napa Valley?" I asked, my voice carrying cleanly and calmly across the quiet room. "Does everyone want to know exactly who paid for the trip, who was secretly kicked off the passenger manifest, and who planned to use my money as a free commercial set to build their personal brand?" I opened the thin manila envelope I had carried with me. I pulled out the stack of heavily documented evidence and spread the papers across the white linen tablecloth for everyone to see. "This is the original contract for the Aurelia Ridge estate," I said, pointing a finger at the first thick document. "It proves that I personally paid $25,000 out of my own checking account for a private family vacation. Next to it is the strict security policy, proving that I had to be physically present with my identification for anyone to even enter the property." I placed the next printed sheet down on the table. "These are the screenshots of Marin mocking me in a private group chat 2 entire weeks before the trip. She was laughing about how I am better suited for paying the bill than actually appearing in family photographs. She bragged to her friends about how she and Ty were going to force me out at the very last minute." I looked directly at Ty, who had suddenly gone completely pale, looking as though all the blood had drained from his face. I placed the final piece of paper on the table, and this is an email Ty sent to the estate manager, alongside another email sent to a regional wine distributor. He explicitly referred to my family as being sponsored, and he was trying to use the luxury villa I paid for to host a corporate business meeting to secure funding for his mediocre company. The dead silence in the ballroom was deafening. The sympathetic murmurs that had just surrounded Marin completely vanished. The aunts and uncles stared down at the documents, their expressions rapidly morphing from misplaced pity to absolute, unadulterated disgust. They realized in real time that I had not ruined a romantic fairy tale out of petty jealousy. I had simply refused to continue financing a premeditated, malicious hijacking before my father could even open his mouth to launch a corporate defense. A voice cut sharply through the tension. It was my grandmother. She was sitting at the head table, her posture perfectly straight despite her 70 years. She had always been a quiet observer, but today, her eyes were burning with a sharp, undeniable clarity. She looked directly at Douglas and Elise. "You two should be deeply ashamed of yourselves," my grandmother said, her voice shaking with profound disappointment and anger. "I have watched you do this for decades. You have treated one of your daughters like a workhorse and an endless bank account, and you have raised the other one to be a spoiled, entitled thief who cannot even comprehend the concept of gratitude." Ty took a sudden step backward as my Uncle Richard, a man who did not tolerate corporate grifters, crossed his arms and asked Ty exactly what kind of businessman steals from his girlfriend's sister to impress his investors. Ty mumbled a completely incoherent, stammering excuse, his smooth charm utterly destroyed by the cold, hard evidence. He turned around, pushed past the catering waiters, and walked quickly out the back doors of the country club. Marin stood frozen in place, the color drained from her face as she looked at the heavy oak doors Ty had just fled through. Right there, in front of our entire extended family. The humiliating truth crashed down on her shoulders. The grand, romantic proposal she had been bragging about was never purely about love. It was a calculated business expense, and the exact moment the free luxury venue disappeared, so did her perfect boyfriend. Douglas and Elise stood completely paralyzed. The perfect, flawless image they had spent their entire adult lives cultivating now lying in shredded pieces on the gift table. Elise opened her mouth to finally speak, her eyes filling with panicked tears. But I held up my hand, stopping her cold. "Do not say a single word," I told them, my voice as hard and unyielding as concrete. "I am completely done. From this exact second forward, I am no longer your safety net. I will never pay for another mistake. I will never book another trip. I will never handle your crises. And I will never rescue any of you ever again. You are entirely on your own." I turned to the head table, offering my grandmother a genuine, soft smile. "Happy 70th birthday, Grandma. I love you." I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom. I walked through the grand foyer, pushed open the heavy glass doors, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun had already set, and the parking lot was bathed in the dim, yellow glow of the streetlights. As I walked to my car, I did not cry. My hands did not shake. I did not look back over my shoulder even a single time. For my entire life, I had left family gatherings feeling profoundly empty, feeling as though I had been abandoned on the margins of my own existence. But tonight, as I started my engine and drove away from the country club, I felt a soaring, overwhelming sense of absolute liberation. They had lost far more than a luxury vacation. They had permanently lost the right to use me as their emotional and financial contingency plan. And the most beautiful realization of all was that I finally knew I did not need them to understand my side of the story in order to be free. I had taken my name back from their script, and the rest of my life belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support us by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.